Welcome back. Thank you patrons, old and new. Appreciate your support. In this video I am making a leather holster for this camera. I had a leather holster that I made, but it wasn't form fit and it kind of got all sloppy and worn out right away. So I thought maybe if I made a molded one, you'd have multiple directions of support and it wouldn't become droopy and worn out right away. And here I am just mimicking the basic shape. And I have to make it out of a solid chunk of wood. In this case, this is a big chunk of oak that I had from a sawmill. I cut some of it up working on my Rockler video that's going to be out hopefully soon. And I'm just basically trying to make a wooden camera. And I didn't have a clear idea. I knew that I had a couple of levels there and then I had to make the negative version of this. So I just was tacking things together because I'm really just sketching in midair. I don't have a solid plan. And said, okay, I have to mush leather down around it, so let me figure out how I'm going to mush leather down around it. I put this framework around it, and I knew I couldn't do all four sides because to stretch leather that deep is really tough. And so here, this is going to be the little scoop out for the lens cover. And so here you see I got it all figured out here. I just tack it on the bottom of that. And there you see I got a big piece that's going to push it down. And those spacers I thought I needed, but in fact I didn't need them. And now I'm pre-drilling because I'm going to use screws. I'm going to use screws to pull this all together. And this is just regular water. This is black leather from Taylor's furniture business. This is leftover from her furniture stuff. She leaves the scraps around. Everybody uses them up in the shop. And I just opened up the aperture so you could see inside. And now I soaked it in there for about 20 minutes, and now I'm just starting to form fit it, see how I could stretch it. And that's that initial frame that I made. Putting the screws in that form and pull it together. And now there's my vise stand. I'm using that to stretch because you see there was a big pucker right at the opening. And I didn't know how much I was going to cut off. I really didn't have much of an idea yet. I mean, I kind of had a vision, but I didn't realize I was going to cut off as much as I ultimately did. So that's why I made it kind of big. And now this piece is going to form that area right under the lens. And you notice how I'm putting the screws in at an angle to try and draw them against the form. And then a few minutes later off camera, I took that piece off and I got rid of those spacers. There you see the spacers are now gone. I fiddled with this for quite some time before, but it was just repetitive screwing and unscrewing, so I just left it all out. And now this is the next day. I'm opening it up, and that's slightly damp still, but in the daytime I got here in the morning and I left it out on the hood of my car in the sun. And now this is later in the afternoon when I finally open it. And I'm just thinking it through, rough cutting it. It is late, sorry, I keep yawning. And now here I'm just drawing how much of it I really need. And I realized I obviously made more than I needed, but I didn't realize I was going to cut that much away. It wasn't until I really took a close look at how it was going to go together. And I just used a dull razor blade, knowing that I was going to sand it later. And I was finally able to cut it apart. And now you see, that's the net result of all that squeezing, that little piece. And the camera kept going on and off, so I eventually pulled the battery out. And now this is a piece of chair from one of Taylor's furniture pieces, and she's often changes her mind, and she saves them for other chairs, and sometimes it goes into the scrap pile. So this is the back of a chair, and I'm using it for the rest of my camera case. And then you see I had to remove the battery. I kept turning the camera on, jamming it in and out of the case. It didn't fit perfectly just yet. And now this is going to wrap up and over, and I don't have an exact idea. Right? At this point, I still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I know I'm not going to leave it a big flappy square. And so I glue it together. And God, I'm so sorry. And so I screw it together. I glue it together. Glue, screw. And I would leave it overnight. And so now this is the next night. Tap that in there. And that form came in really handy. Remember, I just tacked it onto that bottom piece. I didn't glue it. So I was able to pull it out and use it again and again and again. And now here, this is the next day. I'm just sanding that opening. And I keep test fitting the camera, making sure that I'm not going to do something that's going to prohibit it from fitting. And now I'm just using this stitching fork. Got that on Amazon. Look up stitching fork. my vise came in really handy because when you stitch fork through 2 thick layers of leather like that, it's damn near impossible to pull the fork out. You'll see me, I'm speeding it up and you'll see me struggling right there, and then I put the hammer on it to pull it out against the hammer. Then I just said, you know what, let me just pull it out of the vise, and I used the same shot 3 times. It's the same shot each time. And now I finally get to the end, and I'm ready to stitch. And now here I am, I'm just getting some of that wax nylon thread. You can't break that. If you wrap that around 2 of your fingers and tried to snap it off of each hand, you'd end up cutting your finger off. That stuff is incredibly strong. So you have to use a razor blade or a scissor. And a buddy of mine made me that sewing horse. Thank you, bro. And I used it for the first time here, and it was working good. And then it occurred to me, it was kind of wobbling around. It was really the matter of, not the horse itself, but it was a matter of this particular piece. You would really want those stitches right at the clamp, not necessarily the way I have it. I'm holding the one I'm not stitching to stitch the one that's in the air. So you'll notice here I take the block of wood and I put it in the vise stand. And I end up using the block of wood as my stationary object. You see that there. I wouldn't have thought to do that right away, but it's funny, you know, you go through in there, I'm just stitching quickly. I guess I'm doing what you call a saddle stitch. I'm going through both holes at opposite angles, so it's just loop, loop, loop from both sides. And I tie it off, and I usually put a dab of crazy glue on it too. There's a way of stitching it so it stays inside the seam completely invisible, but I get lazy. Now I'm putting a spot where the rivet's going to be, or the snap, and that dictates the shape and everything else. And I'm just trying to get a sexy curve there, a fair curve that looks symmetrical. And I go over to the bandsaw. And I tweaked it a little bit. I'm having problems with color balance in this new shop because the sunlight comes through one door, and I have 3 different lights from 3 different sources, 3 different color temperatures. So that's why see it there? Everything's a different color temperature. I'm sorry about that. I'm even having a hard time color correcting it because everything is so off. So I gotta put gels up somewhere and figure out how to maintain. So you notice there I just sanded, and now I'm getting a much better feel for this, and I'm making the belt loop. The one thing everybody's so concerned about in this video is these rivets are going to scratch the camera. And I know they're not, and that's why I didn't even attempt to keep it from scratching the lens. Because when you set these rivets, that leather is like 3 millimeters thick, so you have about 4 or 5 millimeters of leather ultimately between those, the belt clip and the back. And now when I use the wood in there just to give me backer board for just a minute, and I set the rivets, and then I set the rivets. I'm setting those rivets so tightly that they pucker into the leather. And here I put a piece of metal. That's just a piece of scrap metal, just so I can get a really good hammer down on them. Those rivets are all puckered into the leather. They sit about 1 millimeter lower than the actual surface of the leather. Maybe in time they'll wear up and start to scratch my camera, but by then I'll probably be overusing it anyway. These cameras are fairly disposable. And so here I go. I'm just pumping a hole for the snap, and then I lay it where I think it needs to go, and then I mark it on the case with the camera inside so that I know where it's going to land. And these snaps I have are kind of a short posted snap, so I had to sand the leather back a little bit so that the post would stick all the way through the leather. And there you see. So I just had to grind some of the leather away right where I needed it skinny. And now I'm just setting that again with the machine, or not the machine, but the setter, stem and cradle. The cradle is that piece on the bottom left there. That is designed to hold the shape of the rivet head, or the staple head. And now here my hole punch was too small, so I use a little air die grinder just to make the hole bigger. So you can grind leather just like you grind metal. And there's my post sticking through, and then I set that, and then that was just to get it started, and then I throw a piece of metal underneath it just to drive it all the way home. And I'm real happy with this. And the camera fits in there nicely. And it just looks a little plain for the video. I want to dress it up, and so I have these old leather tooling handles, tools, you call them. I don't use them very much, but I like this because this ultimately looked like something a policeman would wear, and it wasn't my design that way. I just, when I did this design on it, it started to remind me of a handcuff case, I guess. Black leather with the little detailing on it. And then I use this piece of Coca-Cola to just rub the edge and buff up the edge a little bit. And then I use some edge coat, which is a leather edge coat material. It's like a leather paint, leather dye. It dries very thick. It gives you like a plasticky edge. And the reason I don't have a label on it is because the plastic bottle it came in broke, and before we lost all of it, we just poured it into this jar, me and Taylor. And I took a clue from Laura Comp there and wrote on the table what it was. And it's funny, a lot of people noticed that I was copying Laura, and I really was. It was absolutely genuinely inspired by her to write that on there. And I'm glad people picked that up. And I'm just using a little leather conditioner. Just gives it a little shiny. I already got one big fat white thumbprint on it from painting something and going to close my camera case. So there's a big fat white thumbprint on it right now from spray paint. I'm trying to rub it off. Anyway, this camera case is awesome. I use it every day since then, and it replaced one that I wore every day. So this isn't an addition. This is the replacement of one that I never showed. Thank you guys for supporting me. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.